The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to host today this conference in this place that is the main site of EDF R&D. I'm very happy also that it's the first time that we meet after 4 years, because last time it was everything at distance. So thank you for being here. EDF has been present at the Energy Evaluation Europe conference for 10 years now. And we are a member of the planning committee since 2016. In 2012, we were already a sponsor of the conference at the silver level, so it's not a new engagement from us. And our commercial director made an intervention in the plenary session in 2016. And at R&D, especially, we are a contributor to this conference, and we have provided 8 papers for the last 6 conferences, and each edition our researchers have provided papers and data. So for us as researchers, it's a very important place to share with colleagues and to present our works. We have a lot of interest in the evaluation. Energy efficiency evaluation has always been a key topic for EDF. One of the issues for us was the evaluation of the electrical technical solution regarding their economic and climatic relevance for the customers. This evaluation is in line with our raison d'être that is integrated in EDF status of the company today. So it's building a CO2, I should say a GES neutral energy future, reconciling the preservation of the planet, the well-being and the development thanks to electricity and innovative solutions and services. So that's the raison d'être of EDF Group, and evaluation to be sure that we are in the good track is very important. And also for our own offers and advices delivered to customers, evaluating the real impact in their consumption. We are, for example, providing advice to make energy economies, and also to retrofit dwellings. And so knowing if the results are aligned with the expectation is very important for us. We have into our teams an R&D project that is specially dedicated to the evaluation of energy regulations and policies. Of course, we evaluate the main tools of the French policies. As you know, we have the Environment Regulation 2020 that is a key part of French regulation. But also the energy efficiency certificate, and also the retrofitting and dwellings evaluation, so CEE and DPE called in the French regulation. But also, of course, the European rules and directives that are key, because they are mainly deployed in European countries, of course, including France, and we take into account the Fit for 55 impact on French regulations. And since 2006, as the French energy economy certificate has been implemented, we have been an important part of the evaluation process. We take into account those certificates as a tool of the energy and climate policies. We provide technical files, publication papers, and we made proposals on how to make this regulation on energy efficiency certificates evolve to make it even more efficient regarding climate objective in France. We carry studies of R&D studies on the different ways to make energy savings. And we take also into account the social impact, the acceptability of the solution, the technical part, but also the social part. We also provide studies on the economic efficiency of the regulations, and we also contribute to the assessment of the energy efficiency certificates as an expert, and we help to create a standardized sheets that helps to evaluate the different solutions that are proposed to increase the efficiency in the energy field. We have a global research work to evaluate all the French policies and to build models on the global evolution of the consumptions that we take into account for our own forecast. So that's something that is very important for us as energy provider. And what I can tell is that we are seeing the relevance of these works today more than ever regarding two main issues. The first is a short-term one, is how we are going to deal with next winter, where we have a question in Europe to be able to provide energy savings so that everybody gets enough energy to live and to have a decent situation in this winter. So we are working hard in that to find the good advice and the good solution for French customers, but in a global way that also applies to European consumers. And in a long-term issue is the question on how we are going really to have an impact in greenhouse gas reduction, because as you know, when we check the global emission of CO2 and greenhouse emissions, they are not in a good track. So it's very important to check are the policies doing the job to provide the good signal and go in the good path and take the good path? So your work is key, and I think that what you do together will help to provide a real good solution to guarantee a future for next generations. Thank you very much, and have a very nice and interesting conference.
Good morning. Bonjour. Very pleased to be here with you this morning, and my name is Benoît Lebeau. I'm working for the French Ministry of Ecological Transition. I'm not an evaluator, I'm not part of your community, but I'm very close to what you do. My career has been on energy efficiency. I'm very pleased to be the moderator of this morning's session. Jean-Sébastien and the team of energy evaluation asked me to co-chair this week. So you'll see me today and on Friday to moderate the session. So I'm very pleased to be with you with two speakers, Lorenzo PIRELLI and Yamina SAHEB. And we'll talk about evaluation and few words of introduction. I want us to understand that we just spent the coolest summer of the rest of our life. Now on, things will only get worse in terms of climate change. We know that we are not going in the right direction. We know that despite all we know about the reality, the science of climate change, we fail to engage a big energy transition. So what's wrong? Because we know, we have the data. There is a lot of policy, a lot of evaluation, a lot of program, and still we are behind. Last week, maybe some of you, like me, attended a webinar from a team from the US because they made an evaluation of a series of green funds that were created 20 years ago, 15 years ago. Green funds dedicated to the transition. And the evaluation is saying that a quarter of all the funds, green, have contributed to emit more emission in their portfolio. So what's wrong in the evaluation? And we are facing a moment of truth now, because we know with the crisis in Ukraine, all the work we've been doing on energy is even more important now. The French government, my ministry, but also the whole national government, has set a target of absolute energy savings. To the total French energy consumption has to reduce by 10% in the next 2 years. It's a monetary target for this government. And there is a lot of discussion today by the ministry where I belong to really organize the transition. And we will hear from Yamina that technology is not enough. We have to address this mitigation and this strategy, but technology is not enough. We also have to really understand the role of the human dimension, of the level of sufficiency. Energy efficiency is not enough to achieve energy conservation. And we're talking about energy conservation. So I'm very pleased to take part in this week's event, to moderate this session, and where I'm very happy to introduce Lorenzo PIRELLI. You are from the Energy Court of Auditors. And you maybe tell us more about what is this organism this institution based in Luxembourg, and if there is a definition of evaluation, I think you are very well placed to explain to us what is it, and please tell us what you see in our field of energy that is positive and that is less positive. And in a second moment, we're going to hear about Yamina SAHEB. You are a policy scientist. You are one of the lead authors of the latest IPCC report, and you have a lot to say on the science of climate change and the role of mitigation and some of the mental barriers that we have in mind to really maybe just do more. Lorenzo, the floor is yours for your presentation.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you for the invitation to this conference. Thank you for your very nice introduction. I work at the European Court of Auditors in the energy field. For those you who don't know it, this is a one of the 5 institutions of the European Union. So next to the legislative body, Parliament and Council, Commission and judiciary power, you also have a little court based in Luxembourg, like the European Court of Justice. And our main role is to check how the EU budget is spent. So to check how the 1% of national GDP which member states give to Brussels, to the Commission, is being spent for reaching EU objectives. So every year we publish one annual report on the execution of the EU budget, and we publish around 30 special reports, which we call performance audits, where the main question is to assess how EU funds have been spent in terms of economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. So what we really care is that taxpayer money, the EU money is spent according to the principle of sound financial management. So we look for value for money, which means that in the energy and climate field, we take EU budget spent in this field, which is increasing over time, and now with the recovery and resilience facilities increasing even more, because 37% of this budget should be devoted to green policies having a positive impact on the energy and climate targets. So our mandate is getting bigger and bigger, and I will try very shortly to summarize the main findings in the last maybe 20 audits we have done in the last 10 years in the energy and climate field. So it's a big compression exercise because I summarized 10 years of work in one slide, but essentially what we typically find in our audits is that the policies do not have clear needs. So often we criticize in our reports that the policies are quite untargeted, so we don't really address the specific need which should be addressed. The objectives tend to be vague. Often with energy and climate policies, we want to reach also complementary objectives like jobs, improvement of air quality, which are not always clear in the mind of policymakers. And the fact that you don't have clear objective defined ex ante, it makes by definition also more difficult to measure ex post the achievement of the objectives. Then what we typically find when we really assess some programs, some spending into specific project, is that often there is no comparative assessment of the project merits. So the best project, so the project ensuring the best payback time in terms of energy efficiency, retrofitting, or the project which costs less to deliver more kilowatt of energy saved or energy produced, is not necessarily prioritized, because of many reasons, because of selection processes like first in, first come, which do not really favor the selection. And because of the need maybe to allocate the budget, to spend it before some reporting requirements, which, as we found in some report, gives a preference to projects which are more useful in the short term to spend the money, so maybe replacing the LEDs in a building, but which are not necessarily the most effective and cost-effective from the public point of view, because maybe with public money we want to find things which will not happen anyway. And then, coming to the monitoring of results, which is the area more close to the evaluation community, we often found that indicators focusing on the project physical output, so square meter of solar panels installed, number of renovated houses, and we rarely find evidence on the results of such investments. And also, almost nearly no data on the other benefits that this investment should deliver. So that's more or less the picture we find in most of our energy and climate audits. Then one should question what are the reasons for the unavailability of data, for objective not being smart, for no real focus on the objectives. So now I come to some potential challenges for evaluators that I will be glad to discuss today with you. And because in our job as auditors, we often rely on your evaluation or on commission-based evaluation of programs. And maybe some challenges that I put on the table that we find are the following. Maybe it's true that often policymakers do not hear much the results of the findings from the evaluation. Maybe it's also our job as evaluators, auditors, to make ourselves more heard. For example, we present our reports to the European Parliament, to the Council. We make recommendations to better target the policies. And one idea could be to have evaluators more involved in policy design. I mean, often evaluators come at the end of the process, and it would be nice if they would be involved already at the stage of policy design. For example, to help identifying the needs, which is rarely done. Often evaluation come ex post to find what has not worked in terms of results. Then to help translating this vague objective into something more clear in terms of indicator, one idea could also to work with the policy managers on their incentives. So to clarify ex ante, in 3 years we come and we will evaluate you based on these criteria. So it's easier to agree ex ante on the criteria for evaluation rather than ex post on the findings. And it also creates more commitment on the side of the managers of the policies. Then the other big area is the issue of evaluation methods, in which my main suggestion, coming from the typical reply of the Commission, of the Member State when we make some criticism, is the fact that we would like to see evaluation considering more the interaction between policies. So often we criticize the Commission, the manager in the Member States for not having good indicators, good evaluation of a single policy, and the typical reply is, yes, but you need to consider that there is a package of measures intervening in the field of renewable energy, energy efficiency. So it's very difficult to isolate the impact of a single measure, a single project, and to conclude how many kilowatts of energy have been saved. So this input-output relation is not so easy to be done. And it's true that what could be maybe more useful to highlight in evaluations is to help highlighting what is a causality link. Because even policy managers who want to really improve their policy, they will need to know precisely what are the drivers impacting the performance. So when I read evaluations, we often find maybe complicated models, econometric studies, etc. But it would be nice to translate also in easy words, in easy language, what precisely should be changed in the policy. And then the second argument of this point is the fact of comparing. Also in audit, what we try to do is to make some comparison, benchmarks of different policies in different countries. So we take all the EU budget in the energy efficiency field and we compare in different countries how it has been spent. But then the typical reply is you can never compare things because they are not the same, each country is different, the climate is different, targeted population of the policy is different. So it would be nice to see more evaluation studies using counterfactual, using benchmarking to explain in easy terms what has been the real added value of this policy. Also for us, we typically focus on EU money, but next to EU money, there is national money, there is private money, there are no financial measures like regulatory actions. And it's true that all this package of measures, they work together in a certain field. So it will be important to better assess how these policies work together. And finally, what I was anticipating, leading by example. So also maybe trying to reach out more to policymakers in easy terms. So maybe when I read evaluation study, it will be nice to see at the end more concrete recommendation. What should be changed in the policy? When? Where? How? These, I think, are the questions that I would like to discuss today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Thank you so much. We'll now jump to Yamina, but I have one question. How many of you ever come across European Court of Auditors before Lorenzo's talk this morning? How many of you? Yeah, because I never heard about them before. And I'm discovering through Lorenzo that you exist and that you are very involved in evaluation of very important policy at the European level. So.
Yeah, it's also because traditionally the European Court of Auditors was more like the Italian, the French Court of Auditors, more focused on the financial side. So also ourselves, we are evolving, and in the last decade, we are moving more and more to performance audits. We are coming with more and more special report in this field. So report by report, you will finally hear about that.
I'm French, I should have known. Anyway, thank you. We'll take the question after Yamina's presentation. So Yamina, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you, Benoit, for the introduction, and thank you for the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share with you a few of the main findings of the last IPCC report on climate mitigation. You know that the IPCC, we have 3 reports. The first one is about climate science, the second one is about climate adaptation, and the third one is about climate mitigation policies and scenarios. So if I selected only two graphs from the full report, which is more than 800 pages, that I think are linked to the evaluation and what role as evaluators you could play, and why do we need evaluators to target also the IPCC report. So if you look at this figure, it's I show this figure to the, for example, the UN Secretary General. So the first interpretation is that greenhouse gas emissions that are regulated has the increase of the greenhouse gas emissions that are regulated increased from 20% in 2010 to more than 50% in 2020. So he would say, oh, that's great. So maybe we are on track actually to avoid the climate collapse that we may face. And the other interpretation is when you look at this graph is that most of these emissions are in developed countries, that are regulated are in developed countries, and to some extent in some emerging economies. But then developing countries, there are no climate policies yet in place. But this is, you could explain this as well by the fact that greenhouse gas emissions historically took place in developed countries, and it's cumulative emissions that do matter. And that's why you could be positive when you see this picture, right? But then, and this picture is from chapter 13, which is on about national and subnational policies. But then if I come up with this one, which is from chapter 2, and this one made it to the summary for policymaker and not the other one, thanks God. So you see that emissions did not decrease. So between this figure is from 1990 to 2019, but if you look at just between 2010 and 2019 to make it consistent with the previous one, you see that emissions have increased by 1.3% per year. So on one hand, I would say to you that we have increased the share of emissions that are regulated, so you would expect a decrease. And on the other hand, I show to you that there is an increase of emissions. So obviously, there is something wrong. The challenge we have is that we cannot fully answer what is wrong if we are asked this question. So it's really challenging. I checked in the full report, the word evaluation appears 311 times in the report. However, it does not really appear in a positive way. So it appears mainly to say that we do need evaluation, but it's not really there. So we cannot really answer policymakers the question about why we are not fully delivering on climate mitigation, why we are putting policies in place. And this is why in the report we identified several criteria that should be, that we consider that they should be considered by the evaluators in the future to make sure that the work that is done by the evaluators will be taken into account and will allow the next IPCC round, which should start next year, to consider, to be able to answer the question about what's wrong in the policies. Of course, we have some ideas about what's wrong, but we don't have the full answer, and I am happy to discuss what we considered as does not work in the existing policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Yamina. I won't ask how many of you have ever heard about the IPCC before Yamina talk. No. Well, the main topic of this opening session is to find some answers to the big question: how can evaluation inform the way forward, and is a breakthrough needed in our evaluation practice? On one hand, we know that there is a lot of scheme, a lot of tools for evaluation, and when we apply those to the field of the energy transition, what are we missing? There's something that we're missing. You just explained to us that the emissions continue to go up, and so it's not the fault, it's not the responsibility of the evaluators of this community. But are we missing something, and do we need a breakthrough in the practice of evaluation? And what could be your proposal?
I think we definitely need breakthrough in the evaluation and connection to climate issues, and beyond climate issues, connection to sustainable development goals. Because energy, and for example, in this community, we mainly talk about energy efficiency, while in reality what matters is energy savings. Energy efficiency alone cannot deliver energy savings. We need energy efficiency and sufficiency. This is another novelty in our report, is that we had for the first time full chapter on demand reduction. That is not about energy efficiency, it's about demand reduction, which is different, while the evaluation programs that we know, and even the policies actually we have, are mainly efficiency policies. These cannot deliver on climate mitigation. Alone cannot deliver on climate mitigation, we know that. And there is this, just to give you an example, an EU example. So we have this, we have the Energy Efficiency Directive with a target to achieve, with an energy saving target, which is actually a contradiction from physics perspective, because the energy savings, to achieve it, you have two components. Historically, when the first time our countries faced an energy crisis, it was the oil crisis in the 70s. This has led to establishing the International Energy Agency. This program, it was called the International Energy Program, was based on energy conservation. It was not based on energy efficiency. It was only 20 years later, in 1994, that the word energy conservation has been replaced completely by the word energy efficiency. And if you look at the archives of the IEA, you will find out that they even had in the past an energy conservation working party. During my time, it was called Energy Efficiency Working Party. That was the first big mistake that was done in 1994, when we completely moved from energy conservation to energy efficiency. Why? Because in energy conservation, you have sufficiency and efficiency. It is true that in the 70s, we did not name the wording sufficiency did not exist in the Western world. It existed already in Thailand, but we did not look at Thailand, of course. But in our world, we had energy conservation that included both, even if it was hidden. And energy efficiency has taken over, and all the work that has been done to reduce energy consumption, and we mix up. Actually, energy efficiency could reduce energy consumption, but not energy demand. It is sufficiency and not energy sufficiency, as it is understood in France, that reduces the demand. The sufficiency is defined in the IPCC as all the measures and daily practices that avoid the demand for energy, materials, land, water, while delivering well-being for all within planetary boundaries. And it took us 4 years to agree on this definition, and we had to review plenty of publications from different fields, and it took us, we had to make an effort to go beyond energy. I am originally from the energy efficiency community. It took us an effort to go beyond the energy efficiency literature. And this similar effort needs to be done by the evaluator community. Otherwise, we will never capture. The evaluation cannot feed, cannot be used to feed the scientific challenges that we face to be able to answer policymakers when they are asking us what's wrong, what are we doing wrongly.
Well, thank you. I'm pleased that you are introducing the concept of energy sufficiency. That will be one of the topics that we'll cover in the final session of this conference on the Friday. We're going to have some discussion around sufficiency. And I'm pleased to note that we have to maybe adjust the indicators, go back to the absolute energy reduction in demand, and this is certainly a way forward, and thank you for that. Lorenzo, do you have a similar opinion, or do you have another proposal to make?
Maybe starting from this point, one interesting discussion about indicators could be that we often focus on the absolute reduction of emissions, which is of course important, but from the efficiency point of view of the public spending, it's also interesting to see the decoupling of emissions from economic growth and to have more indicators of intensity, so emission per capita, emissions per GDP. And because I'm making, for example, an audit now on reaching the 2020 and 2030 climate targets, and the real thing is that sometimes we don't have even a clear view how and why we reach the targets, or how and why we are not reaching the target. So it might be that there was just an external factor, like the financial crisis in 2009, the COVID pandemic in 2020, and so suddenly, we more or less reach the 2020 targets, and we are happy like that. So maybe more indicators that really look at how well we are doing. And connected to that, the other message that I tried to anticipate already in my presentation is investigating more the drivers of the energy consumption, of the emissions. Because what is still difficult to highlight is the link between the inputs and the outputs, so the causality link. I think this is what will allow us a step further, and evaluation can play a big role on that. So maybe a bit more of evaluations, investigating what are the drivers that push forward the energy consumption or the emissions.
Well, thank you. I see that there is a focus of our community on energy, but we also are aware that by transforming the society, we can bring a lot of multiple benefits to society, reducing air pollution, land pollution, water, and so on. Do we have the tool to also make sure that we capture the multiple benefits of the energy transition? And do we also maybe need to put more effort to develop, to think differently, to make sure that we capture those benefits? Or are you happy with what we have today?
I personally do not like too much the concept of multiple benefit of energy policies or of energy efficiency specifically, because I don't think, I think it's the other way around. The priority for our governments, the priority for you as a citizen is not to have an efficient fridge. You have a need to have your food that does not perish. This is what your need is about. And if you start from the need, then you realize that energy is just a career, and then energy efficiency is just a way to make the use this career better or environmental friendly. I do prefer the concept of impacts of the policies on other areas, and I don't think that you see today with the energy crisis that we are facing, the priority is on energy savings. It's not on energy efficiency. It's just we make this shortcut to energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is one of the ways to do it. The priority will be the health of people, for example. The priority would be the economy, jobs, etc. What is new since the IPCC report 2018, special report on 1.5 degree target? Because we talk in the energy bubble, we look at mainly what's going on under the UN Convention Framework Convention for Climate Change. But in parallel to this process, we had another international process that is called Sustainable Development Goals. This process, the second one, we were not too much as Western people too much concerned about this process, because originally it was the ancestor of that is the Millennium Goals, for example, and that was for developing countries. But Sustainable Development Goals were adopted the same year as the Paris Agreement. It's just that we don't hear too much about it in our countries. It's unfortunate, even if the European Commission, in the case of the EU, is doing, Eurostat is doing an annual report on that, reporting on this. And in the Sustainable Development Goals, you have 17 goals, and you have what matters for the people in their daily life. So sustainable city, for example, health, there is a health goal, there is ending poverty goal, these are the goals. And then what is new is that, so that was adopted in 2015. So since the first IPCC report after the adoption was the one 2018. So they did consider already in this report how delivering on the 1.5 degree target would allow countries to meet their sustainable development goals. And in the final report, we have done more on this link. So making more this link to sustainable development goals and to what matters to people is also an easier way to sell something that is theoretical for someone who is not involved in this. We need to get out of our bubble, because we talk to ourselves. So I speak another language where I speak Kabyle, so it's North African language. And in this language, I don't know scientific wordings. And each time I have to defend something, I try to prepare my speech in Kabyle. And if I am able to do it in Kabyle, this means I can defend it in any other languages, because this means I can speak to the people without having the scientific background, to people outside my bubble, outside the energy bubble. And this is, I think, much more important. So yes, we have a framework. The SDGs framework is good framework. There are some weaknesses. There are plenty of weaknesses with the SDGs framework. However, it's an agreed international framework where, to answer your question, Lorenzo, about the indicators, in the SDGs, you have much more indicators than what we have because among the SDGs, you have 2 SDGs that are linked to energy. One is about clean energy, and the other one by 2030 for everyone, and the other one is about climate action. But so you could look at the SDGs framework and think that you can work only on one, actually, where the word energy exists, if you are completely closed and not open to anything else. But in reality, when you are working on energy, you deliver, or you help countries to deliver on all others. So it matches with 17 SDGs. So in the case of building, maybe last point, in the case of building, we usually talk about energy and climate policies on for buildings. So for us as Europeans, we would think about the Energy Performance Directive, and this is the main directive, and we are excited about this directive, etc. But actually, we did find out that working decarbonization of the global building stock would allow governments to meet 15 out of the 17 SDGs, 15. And for the 15, there is an agreement. There is an agreement in science. There were some publications even going until to 17, but there were only few. So for the 15, we have an international agreement on that. So you see, there is framework. We just need to be open to look beyond our bubble.
Little survey, how many of you in your daily practice of evaluation are making use to the Sustainable Development Goals? Be frank. Yeah, maybe half. So we are someone on our way. Lorenzo, do you have a contribution to the debate of how we can enlarge?
The main thing I will add is that although all these additional benefits are super important and we need to, with evaluation method, to better assess them, it's also a matter of priorities in the end. So I think it's important that the policies have clearly a ranking of priorities. First, we need to reduce energy consumption. Then we want to have air quality improving in cities. Because the problems that I see when we are putting together too many objectives, too many indicators, is that in the end you have everything contributing to everything, which means also nothing contributing to nothing. I'm a bit extreme, but when I see policies which are too vague in terms of objectives and trying to achieve too many things at the same time, at the end, the risk is that they don't really achieve none of them under the excuse that it contributes a bit to everything. So my main message will be, it would be important to have a clear ranking of priorities, which also allows the evaluation. I mean, evaluation methods, of course, can consider with multi-criteria analysis different objectives, and it's important to have in mind all these other objectives, but there still should be a clear ranking of what's the main objective of the policy. Otherwise, without clarity on that, it's difficult to implement and then monitor a sound policy. Well,
I think we're getting to the end of the session, but I have one last question, maybe, regarding the audience for the evaluation. I'm sure that we are all aware of the importance of the financial sectors. In fact, today in our world, we still see a lot of investment in the brown economy. And there's a huge portfolio of commercial banks and investors on the brown economy. Are we addressing the right signal? Are we in position through the tool that we develop on evaluation? Can we make an impact? Can we reach? Yamina, you mentioned that we work in silos, and you propose that sustainable development goals could be a way maybe forward to these silos. But typically, how can we make sure that our community develop the language, the tool to grab the attention of the financial institution? Maybe, Lorenzo, you have a closer connection to those who manage budget at national or European level. Do we need to do more in that toward this audience, and especially the financial sector?
But it's true that last year, in 2021, we published a report exactly on sustainable finance, where we assess the EU taxonomy and criticizing some delays and the fact that there should be more consistency in the criteria that should be used to assess what is green and what is not in finance, like in public spending. So part of this audit was also the InvestEU program, which is under the European Investment Bank control, help, and for sure it's still let's say a developing avenue on which there are many things to be done. Also there, I think it's an issue first of clarity of what I think it needs to be clear to the citizen, to the investor, what is really green and what can be funded. I know that it sounds easy, but it's very difficult to translate into practice. But I just put one word: incentive. I think there should be an incentive at all levels to make it clear. It's like the story of availability of data for evaluation purposes. Who has a real incentive to be transparent and to provide the full data on what you have achieved, especially if results are not that encouraging. So probably we need to work more on the incentives of people with a system, I don't know, of reward and penalties or something which really foster both public and private money into the right direction.
Yamina, do you have some elements on?
I will take as an example the renovation programs that we have in Europe and maybe in France, because we are in France. we put a lot of money, a lot of public money and private money in the renovation. And for example, in France, but we target, again, we come back to the indicators that we use and the role of the evaluators. But all the existing programs at the EU at national level target shallow renovation. And what we count is you have X billion of euros spent, and we say that this corresponds to renovation to X number of houses. But this is not true. So we need evaluators to say that this is not true. This does not consider this. We cannot consider this as an energy renovation. This is just these are small measures that you are putting in place, and then estimating the savings and making it clear that we are wasting our money. And this is where the evaluators have an important role to play. And unfortunately, usually when you look at the reports, the EU reports or the official reports, so they are just congratulating themselves. I am always shocked to see that policymakers, evaluators, and all the people involved in this bubble, they all congratulate each other because they achieved something. However, what they achieved compares to what we should be achieving. And this is the link that is missing. And this is something that we need to make clear because it's public money that we are using. So it's public financial institutions.
Okay, we have time for one or two questions from the audience. So who wants to ask a question to our panelists?
Hi, thanks for those really interesting presentations. My question is, look, for Lorenzo, if you'd done this presentation 25 years ago, I think you would have found the same kind of results. My question is, are we really lacking a willingness by policymakers to do evidence-based policymaking? So whatever message you tell them from an evaluation perspective, even if it's totally brilliant in terms of your methods, you're not going to get heard.
You want to comment? Or?
Yeah, that's a big question, and of course, I mean, evaluators and auditors can arrive to a certain point. I mean, we can do the best possible report, but then on the other side, you also need somebody listening to us. The thing that before criticizing the others, so the policymakers on which we have maybe little influence, my suggestion, humble suggestion, is to at least do our part. I mean, lead by example. So I like the sentence of Gandhi, we should be the change we want to see in the world. So at least let's make our part to provide to the policymakers easy, understandable message, precise enough on what needs to be changed in the policies, because I wouldn't be that pessimistic that all policymakers do not want to listen to evaluators or auditors. Sometimes it's also a way of conveying the information in an accessible format, which is not always the case, to be fair. Also, ourselves, if you look at reports of 10 years ago, we were much less visual, much less communicative. Now, if you take a report today, we are much more clear, to the point, shorter with visuals. It's a little improvement, little by little. Also at the parliament, before it was only the COCOBU, the committee for the budget that were listening to us. Now you even have the energy committee, the environmental committee listening to us. At the council, we get more heard. So let's do our part without losing optimism that we can do our share to change the world.
Okay. One final question. There are two questions, in fact.
Hello, Lea Günther from Motiva Finland. About the role of evaluators. Outside the energy efficiency or environmental evaluation in other types of evaluation, they talk quite often about the role of evaluator as a critical friend and who walks along the implementation period from beginning to end and not just doing some ante and ex post evaluations. Do you think that we should, as evaluators, work more with this kind of role along the whole implementation phase?
Who wants to take that? Doit-on être engagé depuis le début ou est-ce qu'il faut attendre la fin?
Yes, of course. Evaluators should be involved from the start to make sure, because this is where we define when you look at the policies, very often they are not defined in the way that you will be able to evaluate them later on. And it's the case because I think it's the case because evaluators are not involved at the design stage usually of policies. And we think about evaluation as an additional component that will come later on. While evaluation should be easy, it is, when you look at the policy theory, evaluation is one of the components of the policy design, but it's not done in this way.
Yeah, on this I think I can fully agree. It was also in my slides, the idea of having evaluation coming early into the process to help defining the criteria and also to create more commitments of the policymaker. Maybe one last idea on these two questions that you raised, maybe also a bit more of cooperation between evaluators to do maybe bigger evaluations, more wide, that then come to results which are more, let's say, agreed. So instead of having so many evaluations focusing on very specific aspects, it could be nice to attempt some kind of cooperation across countries, across policies. It's what, for example, also as Court of Auditors we are trying to do sometimes. We do joint audits with national courts, so we try to assess in different countries exactly the same policy, how it works in different countries. And I think it can be a way to reinforce our messages. And I mean, imagine that instead of 10 evaluations, you have one big evaluation with the same message coming in several countries, in several conferences. Of course, you have more economy of scale, let's say, to bring a message.
Thank you. We have a final question from the audience.
Thank you. David Kennington from University College London. It's for Lorenzo. Thank you. I hadn't heard of your organization before this. I'm very gratified to hear that you exist. Very pleased. My question is somewhat related to the last one. As an evaluation practitioner, and you mentioned the sort of lack of looking at the sort of question of what would have happened otherwise and understanding the additionality of policies and how that's often unclear. From a practitioner's perspective, you know, it's often frustrating because those sorts of skills to do kind of quite complex evaluations using quasi-experimental techniques or doing in-depth kind of realist evaluations to really try and understand what happened in what circumstances and why and what didn't. You know, those skills sort of exist, but I don't see those questions being asked by the commissioners of evaluations. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on that. You know, is there a kind of skills deficit there that needs to be addressed?
I mean, I tend to agree that this is a missing area of evaluation. However, to be fair with the Commission, when you look as a principle for better regulation of the Commission, they always mention 5 criteria, and one of the criteria is added value. So to demonstrate that the EU money brings some added value compared to national policies. And in this area, I saw some evaluations trying to assess the additionality aspect. But of course, I would like to see more of these counterfactual methods which really help to assess what's the difference that these policies has brought in. Of course, you need to make some assumption. It's not easy, but there is still it's still an area to be developed, I think. And also as Court of Auditors, we look more and more forward for cooperating with the academic world to reinforce our messages.
Just one point about the added value of the EU policies compared to national one. It's always included in the EU, in the Commission impact assessment. It's required. And there you have more, if you are as a practitioner, this is where you would find more about the indicators and methodology used by the Commission to clarify the added value, to assess the added value of the EU intervention versus national ones.
Well, thank you, Yamina. Thank you, Lorenzo. This, I think, will bring this session to a close. I hope you enjoy as much as I did, and I've learned stuff. So this is a good kickoff for a conference that will last for the next 3 days. It's about learning and exchanging. So thank you for the question. Thank you for the